everyone. So today we're going to talk about predictions and preparation. So I'm going to reference 5 different predictions that were made by various world leaders, some of which have come true, and at the end talk to you about ways in which you can prepare. So it's important to remember that these world leaders are not true prophets in the biblical sense, but as there are certain things that they've said that have come to pass, we may want to um, take heed and listen closely to what they're saying. So I also will include some sources in the comments for everyone to investigate for themselves, as well as for anyone looking for help regarding complications with C19, the injections, legal aid, or Christian communities who are not in support of the mandates. So we're going to start off with prediction 1. So prediction 1 is Dr. Fauci's prediction of the pandemic. So in 2017, Dr. Fauci predicted that the Trump administration would experience a surprise outbreak, in the area of infectious diseases. In 2020, that prediction came to pass. What is interesting to note is that in October 2019, the Johns Hopkins University, in partnership with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the World Economic Forum, hosted Event 201, which modeled a fast-spreading coronavirus with devastating impact. And this is a direct quote. Of course, as we all know, a few months later, that came to pass. Prediction 2 was the founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, Professor Klaus Schwab, predicted a cyber attack. In 2020, Professor Schwab predicted a comprehensive cyber attack that would make the C19 crisis look like a small disturbance in comparison and bring the world as we know it to a complete halt. In 2021, a cyber attack led to the complete shutdown of a major fuel pipeline along the east coast of the United States, putting vital infrastructure and people at risk. Several other cyber attacks occurred since then. Of course, this is not what Professor Schwab was referring to, because what he was referring to is a larger magnitude. And also, the pipeline has since been restarted, but one can only wonder if this is just the beginning of what Professor Schwab was talking about. Prediction number 3 is Professor Mariana Mazzucato predicts a climate crisis next year. In a Time magazine article entitled "It's 2023, Here How We Fix the Global Economy," Professor Mazzucato makes a series of fascinating predictions. So keep in mind that this article was written in October 21st, 2020, some of which includes C19 pandemic ending by 2023, President Biden winning the election, and the FDA approving the C19 injections on February 11th, 2021. What is most notable to me was her prediction of the climate crisis in 2022. She predicts a Midwestern drought that will wipe out 1/6 of the world's grain input, and in response, the people would want a green economy. In other words, the people would want the solutions that the government has already had in place and wouldn't have accepted unless there was a crisis. So here's the important thing to note, is that she's not just predicting climate change or climate crisis, but food shortages. She talks about how the world will embrace something called the new normal. Other terminology for this exact same phrase includes the Great Reset, the Fourth Industrial Revolution, Build Back Better, etc. She states that this will happen because there is no going back to normal or business as usual, and from what I can see, there was never a plan to go back to business as usual. As the former mayor of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, stated, "You never want a serious crisis to go to waste." And what I mean by that is the opportunity to do things that you once thought were impossible. It's also interesting to note that she mentions that dramatic interventions for climate change may be necessary, and alludes that climate lockdowns may be unavoidable if everyone is not on board with the green economy. Under a climate lockdown, in her words, you may look forward to the limitation of private vehicle use, banning of the consumption of red meat, and your restriction to access of appliances that use gas because fossil fuels will be restricted. I want to stay with this point for a moment because we're now moving into an era of electric and autonomous or self-driving cars. there's this idea going around that that there will be millions of vehicles taken off the road, which plays into the ideas of restricting private vehicle use and restricting fossil fuel use. One of the proponents of this is President Biden. And although I personally like technology and innovation, one may even argue that there may be some benefits to this, such as cleaner air. It's also important to note that electric and autonomous cars and high-speed rails, with these inventions, it's much easier to track and control the movements of individuals. Other and unknown actors can hack into the vehicles, start or stop the car, thereby controlling where you go and how far you go using AI, so that is something to keep in mind. And she also mentions the interconnected nature of C19 with the climate change crisis and the economic crisis. So this is something that I spoke about in previous videos. So don't think of these crises as separate. They are all connected. Just as these crises are not separate, the solutions are not separate. Therefore, you most likely will see similar solutions used to combat the climate crises as used with C19, except they'll be more stringent. What it seems like is being proposed is that we either get on board with the green economy, which may have some benefits again, but will ultimately lead to us sacrificing freedom for security, or we don't get on board and the governments will take drastic measures to make sure that we do get on board. This is important to note because another idea that is brought out in one of Professor Mazzucato's articles is the idea of the government being a citizen-centered welfare state, or essentially all of us being government dependents, and the idea of digital and e-cards, which is most likely referring to the V passports, which, the V refers to the big V word we've been hearing all year. All of this feeds into the idea from the World Economic Forum that by 2030, you will own nothing, you will have no privacy, and life has never been better. It's important to note that whoever controls the land and the food supply controls you, which is one of the reasons why we need to be mindful of the centralization of resources, which has been occurring through the massive transfer of wealth in 2020, which was also spoken about in my last video. The wealthy, such as Bill Gates, buying up all the farmland, and other events that have occurred throughout the years past. The only difference is that the C19 pandemic helped to accelerate this wealth and land grab. Also, to close off on this point, it's important to note that Professor Mazzucato is a powerful woman whose ideas have caught the attention of other powerful world leaders who support similar policies to combat the world's crises, such as Pope Francis. He indicated that her ideas provoked a lot of reflection within him, and she was invited to sit on the Vatican C19 Commission's Economy Task Force and brief the Pope as well as the Vatican on key aspects, so this is a direct quote again, key aspects of the economic response to C19. So it seems that this relationship has continued with the Vatican and the IIPP, also known as the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose, the organization that she's a part of, to work on other areas such as public health, and the common good, so that we can see her policies will most likely impact us in the months and years to come. Prediction number 4. Bill Gates and Johns Hopkins University predicts a smallpox outbreak. In 2001, Johns Hopkins University conducted a simulation called Dark Winter, which simulated a smallpox outbreak, for which, of course, their solution was the V, or, big V word. You may have heard that President Biden repeating the phrase Dark Winter in some of his speeches and debate with former President Donald Trump. So Dark Winter is a simulation that refers to a smallpox outbreak. Bill Gates also warned of a smallpox bioterrorist attack recently. We also know that recently vials labeled smallpox were found in a research laboratory. Thankfully, nothing was found in the vials, but can we say that these news reports are priming us for the idea of an eventual outbreak? And of course, additional injections are being proposed and developed for smallpox. And prediction 5, which will be the last prediction, Marburg as the next pandemic. Marburg is a hemorrhagic fever similar to Ebola and is currently being tracked. Another V is being proposed, which will most likely be gene-based. It seems like the Vs that are now being created and developed are going along the gene-based therapy pipeline. One of those currently in development is a viral vector injection, similar to the platform used for the J&J C19 injection. It seems like, as I said before, there's a transition from the current traditional V, where you would typically receive an injection of a weakened or dead pathogen, to a gene-based V. What are the long terms of using these gene-based Vs, as well as the interactions between the gene-based Vs and other medications, remains to be seen. So we'll transition into preparation. How about preparation, and what can we do? Because of course we can talk about these issues that we're facing in the world, but what can we personally do in order to make sure that when these things come about, we are prepared for them? And I'd say step number one is seek God. To me, this is the most essential step, and if you do nothing else, do this. Seek His wisdom. Ask Him if there's any validity to what I am saying in this video. And if there's no validity, feel free to ignore everything that I've said in this video. But if there is validity, ask Him to lead and guide you as to what you should do. Also remember that whatever you choose to do, it should not be done in the spirit of fear or haste, but from power, love, and a sound mind. God knows your situation personally, so everything that I say to you after this is optional and highly dependent on your situation and highly dependent on what God is calling you to do. These are just ideas to consider and remember, and ultimately God knows the future and holds the time. So now is definitely the time to start spending in prayer and Bible study if you have not already been doing so. And also it's important to remember that if you do everything else, but you do not do this step, it doesn't matter, because this life is temporary. But eternal life is only found in Jesus Christ, as John 17 verse 3 states. So on to the optional steps. Preparation step number 2. Start thinking about all the things you are dependent on that use power. Start thinking about all the things you would do if there was a long-term power outage. For example, refrigeration, heating, cooling, water. Remember that water plants, plumbing, and recycled water all depend on electric pumps. So how can you practically make sure that you have adequate replacements for this? Preparation step number 3. You may want to stock up on water. Sustainable water purification methods, knowing where the bodies of water are where you live, backup power generators, solar-powered objects, heating and cooling systems not dependent on the grid, matches, learning how to start fires in the absence of matches, etc., etc. Preparation step number 4 is start printing out things that you need and get hard copies. Remember that according to the World Economic Forum, a digital V is coming, so if you don't want to just go along with the terms and conditions of that V, make sure that you have hard copies of the info that you need on hand, and also consider getting hard copies of the maps in the area we live, and also maps of the U.S. and know where to go in case of emergency. Preparation step number 5. Learn to can and dry food so you have a backup food supply. Preparation step number 6. Learning basic first aid and stocking up on essential medicines and vitamins. There will be difficulty buying and selling, as we've been discussing over the past couple of weeks, which will affect those who have chosen to make certain medical decisions first, but will affect everyone soon enough as we face issues such as hyperinflation, supply chain crises, and potential collapse, as well as the dwindling workforce. And preparation step number 7. Consider relocating to a densely populated area where you can grow your own food and become more self-sustaining. And the reason why you might want to consider this is because the issue of buying and selling, where if you have certain beliefs, you'll be prohibited from taking part in the market. Also, we may see scarcity and rationing in the upcoming months, years, due to the issues that we've been talking about. The second reason is less control and interference over your activities. And the third reason is sanitation will most likely become an issue. So if a cyber attack were to occur, this may lead to the stagnation of water because water plants and pumps will be affected. This will lead to the lack of access to clean water, which would ultimately lead to dehydration and the spread of disease, especially in densely populated areas, so some may want to consider living off the grid. So to close and reiterate, with any decisions you make sure that you consult God, you ask God for wisdom and guidance as to what you should do. These are just ideas for you to get started, but God may lead you differently. And with that, that will be the end of the video, and I hope this was informative to you.